Are you an event band trying to figure out how much you should be charging for the gigs you're performing? Well, stick around because in today's video, we are looking at how much your event band should be charging for gigs. So before we get into it here, if you are new to Back on Stage, we are a web platform built for blue-collar musicians, bands, and DJs who want an alternative to all the messy spreadsheets, email chains, and text threads that we're also used to living on. We are a live music booking management software that helps you generate revenue and gig more by combining lots of great things like lead generation, client follow-up, invoices and contracts, income tracking, musician scheduling and payouts, set lists, and so much more into one easy-to-use app. All you've got to do is head over to backonstageapp.com to learn more and start your 30-day free trial. So now back to the video for today. The first tip I want to share with you today for setting your event band rate is to actually head over to backonstageapp.com to our blog and check out our event band rate calculator. Now, what this is going to do is ask you 6 really cool questions that are going to help you figure out what rate you should charge. And we're going to just dive in and walk through this right now because I want to show you what this is going to spit out for you. So first of all, we're going to ask you how many musicians are in your band. That should be a pretty easy question, but of course you can come back and use this again and again to figure out the different rates if you've got different band sizes as well. I'm just going to plug in a 5 here for now to get us started. Now it's going to ask, on average, how many high-ticket gigs do you want to perform each month? Okay, so for this question, you kind of have to think about your whole year-round gig calendar, okay? Maybe if you're in the wedding industry, for example, in my area, for example, the wedding season really lasts from about May or June until the end of September, maybe mid-October. So we've got about maybe 4 to 6 months in there where we're gigging quite a bit, and then the rest of the year is kind of dry. We pick up again in Christmas time for a few corporate parties, but we do have some fairly down months in the year. So maybe we're gigging 3 or 4 times a week in the summer, and maybe only once or even no times a week in the dead of winter, for example. So take sort of your total gig number for the year, divide that by the number of months in the year, and try to come up with a number here. I'm going to say for me it's about 4. That's about 1 gig per week on average. Okay. And again, for the high ticket gigs we're talking about things like weddings and events where you can actually command your full asking price. If you do what I like to think of as marketing kind of gigs or networking gigs where you're actually maybe renting out a club or something to invite all your clients out for like a business building kind of an event, obviously you're not going to make your full asking rate there. So don't think about those types of gigs for this equation. So next question here is how many rehearsals you want to do per month. Now, I kind of want you to give this some thought because if you're a professional event band, there may be very little need for actual rehearsals. If you're hiring professional musicians to perform in this very business kind of setting, you should be able to expect that these musicians can do a lot of homework and show up just kind of knowing the tunes or preparing their own music. Maybe you also provide sheet music for them, arrangements, recordings that they can learn from, ideally so you don't really need to have rehearsals. But maybe you do like to learn a few new tunes every month, or maybe you have dancers, or maybe you've got a front line that really likes to nail their choreography, or a horn section that does choreography, and maybe that stuff needs a little more rehearsal time. So you could think about that here. But one great tip I want to leave you with too is that if you are doing sound checks, you may as well turn those into rehearsals. If you're a band leader, you're probably really painfully aware of how terrible it is to organize a rehearsal. It's like pulling teeth trying to get people together. The other thing is that if you're a professional band, you really should be paying people for rehearsals. So they're not only a cost in terms of all the stress and anguish you go through trying to figure them all out, but you are actually going to be incurring a cost for them as well. So do think about that. Maybe for good measure here, I'm just going to plug in 1 rehearsal here. And maybe you want to think about the same. So next question here is what rate we're going to be paying each of these musicians. Now, again, we're talking about these high ticket gigs. So we're talking about a load in, we've got a sound check, maybe a rehearsal involved there, and a 3 or 4 hour performance. Now, I'm just going to say from my experience working here I'm in Canada, but this is fairly similar across a lot of North America. I've seen a lot of gigs, obviously. So I would say this rate is anywhere from $300 to $600. Obviously, if you're just starting out, maybe it's a little lower. And if you're working with a bunch of really seasoned pros, maybe you need to pay them a little more. But I'm going to go ahead and plug in 400 here. That's pretty standard in my city. Now, what hourly rate do you want to pay yourself for the admin work you do? Okay, we're talking about all kinds of things like client communication, preparing set lists, preparing sheet music for special song requests, bookkeeping, general management, keeping up with your website, all of that stuff. If that's falling on your shoulders, you really need to think about opportunity cost in this equation, okay? If you need to prioritize your band today because you've got 12 clients that you need to deal with and a gig opportunity comes up, what is it going to cost for you to say no to that gig in order to work on your band? If you're able to make $400 or $500 today at a gig, but you absolutely have to work on your band instead, really, you need to make $400 or $500 working on your band to justify saying no to that other gig and prioritizing your band. So what is it going to cost for you to prioritize the work that needs to get done in your band to move your business forward? That's really the rate you need to think about here. So maybe you could hire someone to help you with admin work eventually. Maybe you're not at that point yet, but maybe you could. Maybe there's a minimum wage in your place of residence where you could pay somebody for that. But in my case, for example, my band's generally a one-person show. I'm the one doing all of the work behind the scenes, and I want to pay myself at least $40 an hour for that so that I can afford to say no to gigs that come up if I need to prioritize my band. So how much profit do you want to set aside from each gig? A lot of bands, unfortunately, really don't think about this. You're a business. The point of being a business is to make money and to make profit. If that's not important to you, this is not a business for you. It's a hobby. And that's just how business is. The definition of business is really just an economic tool to make money. So you really do need to think about this. Another thing to think about in this profit equation is, are you planning to work with agents? Agents can be a great way to get gigs, but agents also need to make money, and they're going to do that by taking a commission of your booking. So if you're going to be figuring out your band rate, let's just say you're going to charge $5,000 for your band, and that's your minimum asking price. You absolutely won't go out the door for less than that. If an agent comes along and wants to sell you, they're going to have to add their fee on top of your $5,000. Now, if it's easy for a client to come to your website and get a quote from you and you're quoting them $5,000, and then they go to an agent and they also get a quote there and the agent's quoting them $6,000, for example, obviously they're going to want to book direct with you, which circumvents the agent. Now the agent doesn't really have any incentive to try to get you work. That might end up kind of, hurting you in the long run. So if you build that agent's fee into your pricing from the get-go so that people who come to your website are going to get the same quote they get from an agent, then the agent sees that as well and they'll know, okay, this band's easy to deal with because they're quoting the same rates that I am. Therefore, I can make money on this and they have more incentive to book you. Of course, profit is also really important in the equation of being able to keep your business growing year after year and having money for tough times like another COVID. So you want to be prepared for those so your business doesn't go under when some little expense pops up in the way. So I would say anywhere from 10 to 20% is probably a good number here, but I'm going to start with a 10. And that's it. We've calculated our band rate. So I've already filled all this in here. I'm just going to switch over to the actual results here. So you plug in your name and email address. This is what you're going to get. So again, we've decided, okay, 5-piece band, we're paying everybody $400 a gig, 4 gigs a month with 1 rehearsal in there. I'm paying myself $40 an hour for admin work, and 10% of revenue should be, 10% tacked on as profit. So if you scroll down here, we've got all these calculations for us: preparation and operating costs per gig. Okay, so all of our per gig expenses. We've got client care. We're looking at about 2 hours worth of emailing back and forth and calling with the client. at $40 an hour. Communicating with dead leads. This is something we don't often think about, but this is a real cost to your business. You're going to be communicating with a lot of people who don't end up booking you. That's a real expense, so you got to factor that in. Preparation of sheet music for special requests or custom recordings, or however it is you teach your musicians that music. Preparation of set lists for an hour, booking all your musicians, chasing them all around, bookkeeping for an hour, and wardrobe, dry cleaning, guys. This is a big one because if you've got a special attire for your band, for example, people sweat really hard while they're performing. You may need to clean that fairly often, so think about that. Now into gig day expenses. We've got musicians. That's our biggest line item for sure. $400 a head, we said there. Production, sound and lighting. Now, you may not be the ones covering this, but this is also a great business to get into. If you can offer production and lighting services with your band packages in-house, we're going to do some more videos on that in the future on how you can turn that into a great little side hustle as well. But you may want to factor that into your pricing too. 1,500's generally a good starting point for that. Obviously, if you're a really small band, smaller crowds, you may be able to do better than that. But depending on the city you're in, there are some companies that will charge astronomical amounts for that service. So be aware of that in your city. Rehearsal costs. We said we were going to do one rehearsal per month. And of course, we can spread these costs across our 4 monthly gigs we said we were going to get. So it's going to take me about 2 hours to coordinate a rehearsal. That may be generous, or that may be not enough, depending on how difficult it is for you to plan a rehearsal. And then if you're a professional band, you really should be paying your musicians to rehearse as well. This isn't a charity project for them, so everybody does deserve to be paid. And if you expect them to prioritize that rehearsal and say no to other gigs in order to be there, you really do need to think about that. And then, of course, cost for a rehearsal space. You want to budget that in there as well. Operating costs per month. So these are things that don't belong to particular gigs, but are things you need to think about and factor them into your rate as well. So Back on Stage app subscription, that's going to be about $35 a month, at least right now. Lots of great stuff in there. Bookkeeping, you're going to want to do about 2 hours of that every month. That's for all the auxiliary stuff like your receipts and day-to-day expenses of running your business. Accounting. Now, this is the first thing I would recommend you outsource. Hire an accountant to do your business taxes at the end of every year. Unless you really love numbers and taxation, think about that. Probably not. You probably want to outsource that. It's not going to be something you pay for every month because the accountant's only really going to do that work for you once a year. But if you're budgeting about $100 for a month, it's probably going to cost you about $1,000 at the end of the year to get that filing done. Now, marketing, website hosting, email listing, website building and design. Again, maybe you're not designing and building your website every month, but if you're budgeting about $1,500 to $2,000 for the year for that, that should hopefully get you covered. Social media marketing, if you do any of that, maybe a phone line, accounting software, a CRM, Dropbox for sharing all your files, business bank account fees, insurance if you pay for liability or anything like that. Wardrobe, if you're doing really specific attire for your band, you kind of need to provide that. That may come at a cost. Arrangements for all of your music. Audio recordings, these are for your band members to learn all the tunes. This is your insurance policy. As a band, as an event band, you need to have subs in line to take over. If your drummer gets sick the day before the gig, if you don't have recordings or sheet music in place for another professional to step in and do the gig, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. You may need to cancel that gig. That will hurt your reputation, obviously hurt your bottom line. So be thinking about that. Also, of course, promo video content, that sort of stuff, that comes at quite a cost. You may not need to do this every month, obviously, but if you're putting out a new promo video maybe every year, that's a solid budget for that. Lastly, or not lastly, second to last thing here, 10% for profit. We've factored that in. Now, credit card processing fees. This is super important, something a lot of people overlook. It's going to be around 3%. Now, some people try to pass this on to the client. They're like, okay, I don't want to lose this 3% fee, so I'm going to add it onto my invoice and ding my client for it. Think about that. Put yourself in your client's shoes. Imagine you go to the grocery store, You get $100 worth of groceries, and you get to the checkout, and the person's like, okay, that's $100. You whip out your credit card, and they're like, oh, you're paying with credit card? Okay, that's going to be $103 actually. That's going to come as a bit of a shock. You're going to be like, what the heck? Why didn't you tell me that when I walked in the door? No one likes getting dinged with additional fees right when they're ready to pay. It leaves a really bad taste in people's mouths. I understand that fee's not fun, but if you build that into your pricing, no one even knows it's there. You can then go another step and say, okay, if a client pays with cash or check, for example, we're going to give you a $50 discount. Okay. That's a lot easier to swallow for someone than a random fee that just shows up right when they're ready to pay. They'll be much more incentivized to go with that option and not leave a bad taste in their mouth. Also, things to bear in mind when you let your clients pay with credit card, we've actually seen through our Back on Stage system, people are much more likely to tip you when they're able to use their credit card. It's part of our checkout process in the Back on Stage app. They can just add a tip right there. It's super easy for them to do. And you make more money that's really going to offset this 3% fee and even make you more profit at the end of the day. So that's something I'd really, really recommend. And also think about, again, what your clients are going through. If you're in the wedding market, you've got a bride and groom coming to pay for your services, they may be wanting to put that expense on a credit card because a lot of people have figured out these days how to maximize point systems. It's quite possible to pay for your entire honeymoon on points if you're managing to put your wedding expenses on your credit cards. And that's a huge incentive for couples, and it makes them feel really good when they can whip out that plastic and earn those points. So be thinking about that as well. The more positive feelings you can leave with your customers, the more likely they are to tip you and just feel good about your transaction in general. So as a summary here, obviously we've added up everything. My rate for this 5-piece band I've just plugged in here should be somewhere around $5,400-$5,500. Okay, so that's tip number 1. Head over to backonstageapp.com, like we said, and use that event band rate calculator. That's building your pricing from the bottom up. Okay. So tip number 2 is let's talk about sort of secret shopping the other bands in your area. We're going to build the pricing now from kind of the top down. Now, what you can do is head around. Hopefully you're aware of the bands that are competing with you in your area, and you can just sort of head over to their websites and check out what they're up to, do a little bit of digging, see if you can get their rates out of them. Now, you kind of need to be honest with yourself here, because if you're a brand new band, you probably can't command the same rate that a band that's been around for 10 to 20 years can. So you do kind of need to be honest with yourself in that scenario. But maybe you're a group of seasoned professionals, just come off the road. You decide you just don't want to tour anymore. You're going to start a wedding band and you've got loads and loads of experience and incredible skills. Maybe you can command a higher rate, even if it's your first year as an official wedding band. So you do need to kind of be honest with yourselves there. But the last thing I want to talk about, tip number 3, is to really brand yourself. Think about your branding when you are pricing your product. You've got a few options here. You can position yourself and your brand as something who's really cheap, an alternative, affordable for absolutely everybody. Or you can go a little higher and be sort of the mid-range level. Or, of course, there's the last option, which is going really high-end and being at the top of the food chain, so to speak. So when you're thinking about things like this, obviously, if you're pricing yourself really high, you may be able to command that rate, but you may not have as much work in that space. Maybe you gig once or twice a month only, or even less, but maybe you make a whole lot of money, so it's really worthwhile. Or maybe you just decide, you know what, we want to gig a lot more. Maybe our mandate is to just make the world a better place through all of our music performances. We just want to make that accessible to everybody, so we're going to price ourselves more in the mid-range. So these are kind of things you want to think about and position your branding. Think of a brand like Louis Vuitton, for example. Their handbags probably aren't worth $4,000 or $5,000, but you know, the manufacturing involved is maybe like $50. But because they've really thought about their whole experience in the store and the colors and the feel of everything and their fonts and their sizes and everything so well thought out, they just command a bigger price because their brand is so much more elegant, I guess you could say. So that's tip number 3, is to really kind of think about your branding when you're pricing and how that's going to affect your pricing strategy there. So there you have it. 3 really great tips on how to figure out the cost for your wedding band. I hope that helped. Again, if you're just checking out Back on Stage, go take a look at us at backonstageapp.com. We'd love to hear from you and help you get your band to the next level with our band management software. So thanks again for checking this out. Have a wonderful